The first thing you notice when they pull you out of the boarding line isn't the hand on your arm, it's the silence. People stop shuffling their feet. The murmur of airport chatter dies, and suddenly, the world is watching you like you've been caught smuggling a bomb. I wasn't smuggling anything. I was carrying a leather duffel bag with a change of clothes, a neatly folded uniform jacket, and a set of medals I'd worn 2 nights ago at the Pentagon. But to the man in the blue TSA vest, I was just another black traveler moving with too much urgency toward my gate. "Sir, step aside," the officer said, his voice crisp and cold. I blinked. "Is there a problem?" He didn't answer, just gestured toward a roped-off inspection area. His partner, a younger woman with dark hair, pulled into a severe bunk closed in behind me like I might bolt. The irony? I'd spent 35 years of my life serving this country, commanding sailors, navigating aircraft carriers through storms most men wouldn't survive. Yet here I was, a 2-star Admiral of the United States Navy, being herded like a suspect in front of gawking strangers. "Random check," the man said flatly. "Random," I repeated, tasting the word. "What exactly are you checking for?" "Sir, please comply," the woman cut in. She avoided my eyes, but her jaw was tight. I could feel my pulse hammering, not from fear, but from the cold slap of humiliation. Around us, travelers pretended to be busy, but I could see the sideways glances, the quick phone cameras being raised, the quiet murmurs. A little boy holding his mother's hand whispered, "What did he do?" I wanted to answer him. I wanted to tell him that sometimes you don't have to do anything except be the wrong color in the wrong place. The TSA officer unzipped my duffel, rummaging through neatly folded clothes with the kind of roughness reserved for contraband searches. He paused at my uniform jacket, navy blue with gold trim, the rows of ribbons perfectly aligned. "What's this?" he asked. I stared at him, almost laughing at the absurdity. "That's a Navy service dress jacket." "Where'd you get it?" "Earned it," I said, my voice clipped. The woman glanced at the nameplate on my jacket, then at me, her eyes narrowing as if trying to reconcile the letters with the man in front of her. "You're in the Navy?" she asked cautiously. "Still am," I replied. "And you're about 30 seconds away from making a mistake that's going to end up on every news network in the country." The man snorted, clearly unconvinced. "Sir, we have reason to believe." "No, you have assumptions," I cut in. My voice carried farther than I intended, and a few more phones went up. At that moment, I caught sight of a familiar figure approaching through the crowd, a tall, broad-shouldered man in a black suit, moving with the kind of precision that only comes from military training. "Commander James Wilcox." "My aide-de-camp, Admiral Carter," Wilcox called out, his voice like a thunderclap in the tense air. Both TSA officers froze. The man's hand fell away from my bag. "You're making a scene," Wilcox said evenly, but his eyes were sharp, aimed directly at the officers. "Do you know this man?" the woman asked. "Yes," Wilcox said. "He's Rear Admiral Marcus Carter, United States Navy. And if you have a shred of common sense, you'll apologize right now and step away." The color drained from the man's face. The woman opened her mouth, then closed it again. I could almost hear the gears turning in their heads, the frantic realization that the man they'd just pulled aside wasn't some anonymous traveler. They had just detained a decorated military officer in full public view. But the damage was done. The crowd had already taken sides. A middle-aged black woman shook her head in disgust. A white man in a baseball cap muttered something about "same old story." And somewhere in that sea of strangers, someone was probably already tweeting about it. The officer cleared his throat. "Sir, save it," I said quietly. "Your apology won't undo what everyone just saw." Wilcox stepped closer. "Admiral, your gate's boarding. Let's go." We walked away, but the sting followed me down the terminal. I could feel the weight of every glance, every whispered comment, every unspoken judgment. You'd think 35 years in uniform would earn you a little benefit of the doubt. But the truth is, in that moment, the stars on my shoulder meant less than the color of my skin. And that, I thought bitterly, was the part no metal could fix. By the time I reached my seat in first class, the adrenaline had faded, leaving something heavier in its place, kind of bruised exhaustion I'd felt too many times in my life, but never expected to feel here, at 60 years old, wearing the weight of a 2-star rank. I stowed my bag in the overhead compartment, ignoring the sidelong stares from 2 passengers across the aisle. I knew what they were wondering. Was it true? Was I dangerous? Did I get away with something? As the plane's door closed, my phone buzzed for missed calls from my daughter, Alana. I called her back immediately. Dad, she said without greeting, her voice tight. You're all over social media. My stomach dropped. What? Someone filmed the whole thing. It's on Twitter, Instagram, everywhere. People are furious. Some are saying it's racial profiling. Others are calling for those TSA officers to be fired. I closed my eyes, the image of the boy in the terminal flashing in my mind. What did he do? I didn't want this to blow up, I murmured. Maybe you didn't, Alana said. But people need to see it. You've spent your whole life serving this country, and they still treated you like a criminal. That's not just your story, it's ours. Before I could answer, the flight attendant approached, smiling politely. Can I get you anything before takeoff, Admiral? Her voice was warm, respectful. I wondered if she'd seen the video too. When we landed in D.C., Wilcox was waiting at the gate with a look that said things had gotten worse. You're trending, he said without preamble. Admiral Carter is #1. The Navy's Public Affairs Office wants to talk to you before you say anything publicly. I don't intend to make a statement, I said. Sir, it's already a statement. The video's got over 2 million views. Reporters are camped outside your apartment. This isn't going away. We walked through the terminal together, the air around us electric with recognition. Some people nodded at me in quiet solidarity. Others stared like I was some kind of walking headline. At baggage claim, a reporter broke through the crowd. Admiral Carter, do you believe you were targeted because of your race? Wilcox stepped in front of me. No comment. But my silence was its own kind of answer. 2 days later, I was sitting in a mahogany-paneled conference room at the Pentagon, across from Admiral Keating, the Chief of Naval Operations, and a cluster of senior officers. This situation, Keating began, has become a political firestorm. Civil rights groups are demanding accountability. The TSA is scrambling. I kept my hands folded on the table. I didn't ask for this attention. No, Keating said, but it's here. And whether you like it or not, you've become a symbol. I'm a naval officer, not an activist, I replied. Keating's gaze softened, just a little. Marcus, you've spent your career fighting for this country. Now it's asking you to fight in a different way. The room was silent except for the hum of the air conditioning. I could feel every pair of eyes on me. Sir, I said finally, if I speak, it won't be to protect anyone's image. It'll be the truth. The truth came out 3 nights later, on national television. I sat across from the anchor of a primetime news program, the studio lights hot against my skin. They rolled the footage, the TSA officer's hand on my arm, the search, the uniform jacket pulled out like evidence. Then they cut back to me. What went through your mind in that moment? The anchor asked. I took a breath. I thought about my father, who was stopped by police for looking suspicious while walking home from work. I thought about my daughter, who's been followed around in stores like she doesn't belong. And I thought about the fact that I've given my life to defending freedoms that I wasn't being granted in that moment. The anchor's expression was solemn. Do you believe this was racial profiling? Yes, I said simply. And that's a conversation this country still doesn't want to have but needs to. The interview went viral overnight. My inbox filled with messages, some from strangers thanking me for speaking out, others from service members sharing their own stories. But there were also the predictable critics, the ones calling me overly sensitive or playing the race card. I ignored them, because for every insult, there was a message from a young black sailor saying, "Sir, you made me feel seen." The TSA issued an official apology. The 2 officers were placed on administrative leave pending investigation. The agency announced new training protocols on implicit bias, promising change. But I'd been alive long enough to know that policy memos don't erase prejudice. The real change, I thought, was in the conversations happening in airports, in living rooms, in Navy barracks. In the way people looked at me in uniform, a little differently, knowing what I'd been through. 1 week after the incident, I received a letter from that little boy's mother. Dear Admiral Carter, it read, my son saw what happened to you. We watched your interview together. He asked me why someone would treat you that way. I told him the truth. And then I told him you stood tall and didn't let it break you. Thank you for showing him what dignity looks like. I read it twice, my throat tight. That letter meant more than any medal. Because in the end, the stripes on my sleeve weren't what defined me. It was the way I stood when someone tried to strip them away. By the second week, The incident had outgrown me. It wasn't just my story, Anna Marie. It had become a litmus test for the country's conscience. Congressional leaders were weighing in. The Secretary of Homeland Security had called me personally, voice carefully measured, promising a thorough review. Civil rights attorneys were circling like hawks, ready to sue on my behalf whether I asked them to or not. And then came the summons, a formal invitation to testify before the Senate Committee on Transportation and Security. The hearing room was a cavern of polished wood and cold formality. Rows of cameras lined the back wall. I sat at the witness table in full dress uniform, my medals catching the glare of the overhead lights. Beside me, Wilcox adjusted his tie, scanning the crowd like a bodyguard. The committee chair, Senator Whitmore, cleared his throat. Admiral Carter, thank you for appearing today. Please begin with your account of the events at Atlanta International Airport on June 14th. I spoke evenly, not embellishing, not softening. I described the line, the sudden pull aside, the search, the way my service jacket was held like evidence. I told them about the little boy's question, about the silence in the terminal that felt heavier than any storm I'd faced at sea. Some senators leaned forward, nodding. Others looked down at their notes, faces unreadable. When I finished, Whitmore folded his hands. Admiral, in your opinion, was this an isolated incident or part of a broader problem? I met his gaze. Senator, I've spent decades in uniform, traveling through airports all over the world. This was not the first time I've been treated with suspicion for no reason other than the color of my skin. It happens to countless Americans every day. The only difference this time is that it happened to someone whose title made people pay attention. The room was quiet enough to hear the hum of the air conditioning. When the TSA administrator took the stand, the mood shifted. He was careful, too careful. He spoke of procedural missteps and opportunities for improvement, never once saying the words racial profiling. Administrator, I said, when given a chance to question him, do you believe I was stopped because I was black? He hesitated, glancing at his counsel. Admiral, I can't speculate on the motives of individual officers. I'm not asking you to speculate, I interrupted. I'm asking if, as head of this agency, you acknowledge that bias, conscious or unconscious, plays a role in how travelers are treated. A ripple went through the audience. The administrator shifted in his seat. We are committed to ensuring all passengers are treated equally. That's not an answer, I said quietly. The exchange made headlines within hours. By evening, clips of it were playing on every major network. The moment labeled Admiral Carter confronts TSA chief. Behind the scenes, the pressure mounted. My phone buzzed constantly with calls from Navy brass, lawmakers, advocacy groups. Some urged me to tone it down, warning that pushing too hard could backfire. Others wanted me to become the public face of reform. But I wasn't interested in being a mascot. I wanted results. 2 weeks later, I got them at least on paper. TSA announced a new nationwide initiative, expanded anti-bias training, stricter oversight, and a civilian advisory panel to review complaints. It sounded good in the press release, but I'd seen enough initiatives die quietly once the headlines faded. So when a civil rights attorney named Vanessa Price approached me with an idea, I listened. Sir, she said, what happened to you was a symptom. We want to take the fight to court not just for you, but for everyone who's been profiled at airports. This could set legal precedent. I thought of that little boy again. I thought of my sailors. And I said yes. The lawsuit drew even more attention than the hearing. The government tried to settle quietly. We refused. Months later, I found myself in a federal courtroom, sitting across from the same 2 TSA officers who had stopped me in Atlanta. They looked smaller now, stripped of their uniforms, their lawyers whispering in their ears. On the stand, I recounted every detail again. This time, I let the emotion bleed through. I have commanded ships in combat zones, I told the jury. I have stood on the deck of an aircraft carrier in a hurricane. And yet, the humiliation I felt that morning in Atlanta was unlike anything in my career, not because I was afraid, but because I knew exactly why it was happening, and I knew there was nothing I could do to stop it. Vanessa's closing argument was a masterclass. She didn't just argue the law, she told the jury a story about service, about dignity, about the promise of equal treatment under the Constitution, and what it means when that promise is broken in a place as ordinary as an airport terminal. The verdict came after just 4 hours of deliberation. Liability confirmed. Damages awarded not just to me, but in the form of a court order requiring TSA to implement real, enforceable changes, monitored by an independent body. It wasn't perfect. It wouldn't erase the looks, the whispers, the moments of suspicion I'd faced before or would face again. But it was something. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. I gave one statement. "This was never just about me," I said. "It's about making sure the next time a black man walks through an airport, whether he's a sailor, a teacher, or a kid going to college, he makes it to his gate without someone deciding he doesn't belong there." That night, alone in my apartment, I opened the letter from that boy's mother again. I read it slowly, like a prayer. And for the first time since that morning in Atlanta, I felt like maybe, just maybe, a silence I'd heard when they pulled me aside had been replaced by something louder. A conversation. A reckoning. A chance. 3 years later, I found myself standing in another airport terminal. Same polished floors. Same endless drone of flight announcements. Same smell of burnt coffee and fried food drifting from a kiosk. But I wasn't traveling for a hearing or a meeting or a mission. This time, I was here for something far more personal. My daughter Alana was arriving from California with my first grandchild. I'd been counting the days, the hours. I leaned against a pillar near the arrival's gate, hands in my pockets, watching the steady stream of passengers pour in from the jet bridge. Families reunited with tight hugs. Business travelers checked their watches and kept walking. Couples kissed, oblivious to everyone else. And then I saw him. Not my grandson, not yet. A young black man in his early 20s, tall and slim, wearing a hoodie and jeans, backpack slung over one shoulder. He was walking toward the exit when 2 TSA officers stepped into his path. Something in my chest tightened. They spoke to him briefly. I couldn't hear the words over the noise of the terminal, but I saw the way his body stiffened, the way his eyes darted toward the crowd. He answered, gesturing toward his bag. One of the officers took it from him, unzipping it on the spot. The crowd's energy shifted in a way I knew too well, curiosity mixed with that quiet, collective suspicion. I was moving before I realized it, my shoes clicking against the tile. "Excuse me," I said, stepping up beside the young man. The officers looked up. One was a woman in her 40s, the other a man with a buzz cut and a badge clipped to his belt. "This is a random screening, sir," the man said, his voice stiff. "That's fine," I replied. "But I'd like to see your supervisor before this goes any further." "Sir, that's not." "It is," I said evenly, pulling a leather wallet from my jacket pocket and flipping it open to reveal my retired Navy ID. The embossed gold eagle still carried weight. "And while you're at it, I'd like you to be aware that this airport falls under the new anti-bias oversight rules, which I helped put in place. That means this search needs to be documented, justified, and reviewed by the Civilian Advisory Board." The woman's eyes flickered with recognition. "Admiral Carter?" The name hung in the air like a thunderclap. A few bystanders turned their heads. The young man looked at me with something like disbelief. "That's right," I said. "So why don't we take a step back and think very carefully about how we proceed here?" The man hesitated, then zipped the backpack closed and handed it back. "You're free to go," he muttered. The young man nodded at me, still looking a little dazed. "You okay?" I asked quietly. He swallowed. "Yeah, thanks. I didn't do anything." "I know," I said. "Sometimes that's all it takes." We walked toward the exit together. Alana spotted me before I saw her waving with one arm, balancing the baby carrier with the other. She crossed the terminal, the little bundle inside the carrier shifting softly under a blanket. I leaned over to see him for the first time, my grandson, tiny and perfect, his fingers curled into fists like he was already ready to fight the world. "What's his name?" I asked. "Marcus," she said, smiling. "After you." I felt something catch in my throat. Behind us, the young man I'd just helped was disappearing into the crowd, swallowed up by the flow of travelers. I wondered where he was headed, whether our paths would ever cross again. Probably not. But maybe, one day, he'd remember the moment. Not the officers, not the search, but the fact that someone had stepped in. A week later, I was back in my study, rocking Marcus in my arms while Alana took a nap. He was warm and impossibly small against my chest. The afternoon sunlight streamed through the window, pooling across the shelf where my medals and photographs sat. I looked at them differently now, not as symbols of battles fought at sea, but as reminders that the fight for dignity doesn't end when you take off the uniform. When Marcus stirred, I whispered to him, "You're going to grow up in a world that's better than the one I walked through. Maybe not perfect, but better. And when you run into people who don't see you for who you are, you'll stand tall. You'll know you belong." He made a small sound, like he was answering. The next time I traveled, it was to attend a memorial for an old shipmate. I moved through security like anyone else, shoes off, bag on the conveyor belt, arms raised for the scanner. The officer checking IDs glanced at mine, then at me. His expression shifted slightly, but not in the way I was used to. "Thank you for your service, Admiral," he said, handing it back. I nodded. "And thank you for yours." As I walked toward my gate, I realized something had changed. Not the world, not entirely, but the space I was walking through felt a little different, a little less hostile. And maybe that was enough for now. Months later, I received another letter. This one was from the young man at the airport. "Dear Admiral Carter," it began, "I didn't know who you were that day, but I knew you were someone who saw me, who didn't just walk past. I wanted to tell you I'm starting Navy officer training next year. I want to serve like you did. Thank you for showing me what leadership looks like, not in a uniform, but in life." I read it 3 times before setting it down, my chest full in a way I hadn't expected. Life goes on. Airports are still airports, loud, chaotic, impatient. But every time I pass through one, I carry the weight of that morning in Atlanta, not as a burden, but as a compass, a reminder of where we've been and where we still need to go. And sometimes, when I see a young sailor in uniform, or a family traveling together, or even just a kid staring out the window at the planes, I think of that little boy's voice from years ago. What did he do? The answer, now, is simple. He served. He stood. He didn't let them take away what he knew was his. And maybe, just maybe, that's enough to make someone else stand too. Thank you for listening. If you find it interesting, please like and subscribe to follow the next stories.